Good morning and welcome to Moving Through Menopause. I'm joined this morning by Brittany Pearse, and Brittany is a certified nutritionist, registered nutritionist, and highly qualified is all I'm going to say. Brittany and I are going to have a chat this morning all about the gut microbiome. So hello, Brittany, how are you today?
Hello, fine, thank you. I hope you're well too.
You know, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. I've done some yoga this morning, so I'm feeling even finer for doing that.
Oh, brilliant. The weather's lovely here, so I'm going to get out for a walk later on.
Me too. Yeah, let's do that. So, you know what, Brittany, I did have ulterior motives in chatting to you because my gastrointestinal system has been something that I have struggled with pretty much for the whole of my adult life. And actually, my first episode was even before I was around the age of 10, so really, really quite young. And over that time, all I've ever gleaned is that I may have irritable bowel syndrome and that this has traveled with me through life, shall we say. But what I definitely noticed was that those symptoms really came to the fore during the perimenopausal period. And, and so finding that foods that used to be perfectly innocuous became foods that were less innocuous and created symptoms. And so a whole host of gastrointestinal symptoms that we might experience, bloating, generally that speaks to gas contained somewhere within us, and pain, and then with regards to the inputs and outputs, sometimes heartburn, and the list goes on. Now, you didn't come to hear all about me, I know this. But I have come to understand that the gut has its own set of microbes that live therein, and that these have a huge part to play, not just in the health of our guts, but also in the overall health of our bodies. And so I would love, because I know this is something that you are particularly well versed in, and so I would love to have a chat about the gut and the gut microbiome, and how can we use this to our advantage?
Yeah, of course. I mean, all of the what you've talked about with your own experience, it's something that lots of people struggle with. And the gut microbiome, definitely there's research coming out more and more on how the gut microbiome can interact with our health in different ways. So it's a really interesting area. And I'm working within this sector in research, but for Clasado Biosciences, who are conducting research in the gut microbiome and prebiotics in particular. But it might be good to start with maybe a definition of the gut microbiota and what it is and how it might impact and be beneficial to health. So I'll start there if you don't mind. The gut microbiota, and this term is sometimes used interchangeably with gut microbiome, is a collection of our microorganisms, including fungi, viruses, bacteria, protozoa, that make up this ecosystem of microorganisms in our gastrointestinal tract. So right through our GI tract, we see this community living there. And it actually starts to assemble in the first 3 years of life. So where you mentioned you maybe first had an episode in early life during childhood, our gut microbiota assembles in the first 3 years of life in early life, but also maybe this might begin during pregnancy, the way the community starts to form, and transfer of microorganisms from mother to baby. And the gut microbiota becomes relatively stable as a community in adulthood. But of course, this isn't the case for everyone. But the pattern we see throughout the life stages is that in adulthood, this community is relatively stable if fed a diverse diet, including plant-based foods and prebiotics. And the gut microbiota is as unique to us as our fingerprints. So a good gut microbiome can look really different in different people, but we do see a pattern in this community and the different microorganisms making it up. So good gut bacteria have been related to health and different functions in the body. An example here could be the communication between the gut and the brain. So this is referred to as the gut-brain axis, and sometimes the gut is called the second brain. You see that written in some places. And then there's also how the gut is related to the immune system, and we have 70 to 80% of our immune cells in the gut, and the gut microbiota can communicate with our immune system. Of course, a balanced gut microbiota is what's important in the relationship to health and overall well-being.
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? That one, it can be quite individual, and two, that we're trying to create a set of circumstances that are optimal for that individual. And I read about 750,000 different genomes in this ecosystem that you described. Is that a figure that resonates with you?
Yeah, so there is debate about exact figures and things, and how this is where the terms I mentioned earlier, gut microbiota and gut microbiome, differ slightly. So gut microbiome is including the genome of the microorganisms, and whereas gut microbiota originally referred to just the microorganisms themselves, but of course their genes will also affect our body and the way our systems function. So yeah, it's really interesting, the scale and how our gut microorganisms actually outnumber, well, not just our gut microorganisms, but the microorganisms in general making up the human microbiome are outnumbering our human cells. So it's just on scale, there's a huge number, and that really suggests how there may be an impact on our health.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that they're very, very small. So we effectively, the mass of us is greater, but there's more in number of them. So I mean, it is an still emerging science, really. So how you said it's relatively stable throughout adulthood, and I'm assuming that really relies upon us maintaining a relatively stable health, because obviously it can be impacted both ways. Our health can impact that, and that can impact our health, and it's this ongoing kind of cycle of things, isn't it? But if our health is relatively stable, then we can assume that the gut microbes are doing the thing and getting on with life, and everything's fairly stable. But definitely changes in my experience, there's something afoot around that time of perimenopause, and so I guess with aging in general, that we appreciate changes. Is that something that you are aware of?
Yes. So do you know the term Immuno Senescence?
That's a new one. Tell me again.
Immuno Senescence. So it describes the age-associated alterations to the immune system. So we have in different life stages, there could be changes, but this in kind of the later life stages is where we get these age-associated alterations. So that's another way where how the development of the immune system is related to the development of the gut microbiota as well, and bidirectionally. It's also thought that an aberrant gut microbiota, so where we have a decline in good gut bacteria and a change in the balance of the composition of the gut microbiota, could be related to the decline in our immune modulation with age. So that's another change that we see. But during, as you mentioned, perimenopause and the transition to menopause as well. During that life stage, the presence of estrogen falls, and the presence and or absence of estrogen can alter the composition of the gut microbiota. And the fall in estrogen that we see during menopause, and the change to estrone being produced by the ovaries as well, could then be related. And more research is needed to determine if this change in estrogen is related to the gut microbiota or the other way around, and if there's an effect. We don't know that yet, and we need more research in that area. But what's also interesting is there's a decline that's seen in the whole group of bacteria known as the Firmicutes phylum in postmenopause.
Say that again.
It's Firmicutes, so that's the group name, and phylum is the group. Essentially, that's the word for the group, and we're talking about bacteria.
Firmicutes.
Yes, it's this umbrella term for lots of bacteria, and in postmenopausal women, we see in the research a decline in this group of bacteria, and it's thought to be due to the change in physiological processes related to the fall in levels of estrogen. So, like we get changes to intestinal calcium levels. So, you hear in the life stage of menopause, there's reduction in bone mineral density, which I'm sure you've spoken about before. That then relates to how much intestinal calcium levels there are. And some bacteria will use calcium as a fuel and break calcium down. So that's the suggestion as to why there might be a fall in certain types of bacteria, because there are physiological processes that change during this time, which means that it might change the environment for the gut bacteria.
Well, I suppose what you're saying there is that it isn't just what we're putting in our mouths that's making a difference to this ecosystem inside the gut, and so the shift, certainly in the shift of the osteoblast, osteoclastic activity, and the demineralization of bone must contribute to this increased level of calcium that's in the gut, which is passing through us. And then these particular fellows that like the calcium do well because there's lots of it, and others may be doing less well because they're deprived of whatever it is that they require. Is that what we're saying? So it's a shift in the balance then?
Yes, essentially, and that's one theory, of course. So we do need more research to see what is actually going on and work out these mechanisms, and establish mechanisms for the change in the gut microbiota during that life stage.
I mean, I think this is right, isn't it? With things that are bidirectional, it's a challenge to decide where is the starting point for this, you know. And that's true of lots of things in our lives, really, isn't it? You know, thoughts, emotions, feelings, perceptions, sensations. You know, where does it all begin? Sensations create emotions, emotions create sensations. Oh, you know, we could go on. So this clearly is a phenomenon that is existing even down at this tiny cellular level. I mean, it is fascinating, and the more research we do, the more we learn, the better, you know, in my humble opinion. But, you know, ultimately it's about what can we do to feel better, be healthier, guard against chronic conditions like diabetes, like heart disease, like dementia, and the bone health as well. All these things that are increased as a consequence of this lack of estrogen, and so, you know, what contribution can the gut make to that? I appreciate what you're saying. The science is still in its infancy, and there's a lot of research in that particular area to be done. But you know, overall, how is this ecosystem? You've talked a little bit about the immune system, how it's, you know, they're working together, and that, you know, I mean, that speaks to lots of things, just even the common cold, how likely we are to get the common cold, even the COVID virus. You know, I try not to talk about that too much, but it does rear its head on occasion. And actually succumb to, I also heard that the healthier the microbiome, or the more variety, whatever the classification of health in that area is, the less likely you are to suffer from food poisoning, say, even for instance. So, it protects us in lots of areas, and how it relates to the rest of the body. Do you have any more to add to this?
Yes, well, it's a really interesting area. It's fascinating, where all the directions of research and how there might be interactions with the rest of our body. And like you say, with food poisoning, so the gut microbiota help with our intestinal barrier there. So that's where that might interact. But also coming back to the gut brain axes that I mentioned earlier. So when we get this feeling nervous, worried, or stressed, and we get butterflies in our tummy, that's related to signals between the gut and the brain as well. Processes like the immune response, so where you're talking about the common cold and things, and metabolism as well. The bacteria present and metabolites, so that's the products of fermentation. When the bacteria ferments food, those present appear to be related to different physiological processes and maybe beneficial to health. So short chain fatty acids are some of the metabolites talked about, and how they signal with the body and are involved in immune signaling, but metabolic signaling as well. One that's really interesting that I found recently from reading the research is the gut-liver axes, and the relationship there, and how the liver is such an important organ, and we have the portal vein going from our gut to our intestines to our liver, and its communication with the gut microbiota is related to liver health, essentially. So it's a fascinating area. And then also coming back to kind of lifestyle factors, when we look at exercise and the influence that exercise has on the diversity of our microbiota, those who regularly exercise have a more diverse gut microbiota than those who are sedentary, and then that's linked to health. So it's a really dynamic relationship with our body and the gut microbiota, and bi-directional, as you said as well. And of course, dietary. Oh, sorry, I was just, of course, saying dietary modulation as well.
I mean, this is what we're talking about. You mentioned a word that says magically managed to leave my mind, but I think what you were talking about was the whatever it is that the microbes are living on, for want of a better word, generates byproducts.
Yeah, so
go on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So the fermentation of so this, it actually relates to our diet, really. And so the diet that we eat is feeding our gut microbes as well. So the non-digestible carbohydrates and other dietary components can be utilized by our gut bacteria, fermented, and then the byproducts that this reaction, the fermentation produces, like short chain fatty acids, can then be used by our body. So it's really how you see there, where the gut bacteria using what we eat as fuel, and then our body can then use the byproducts.
Oh yeah, it's a bit like photosynthesis. I always think we consume oxygen and produce carbon dioxide, and plants consume carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, and that's the kind of a cyclical thing. So these microbes inside of us are doing a very similar thing, which is taking a byproduct of digestion and turning it into something useful for the body.
Yes, and that's a great comparison actually, because if you think about it, plants are within our ecosystem that we're living in, and we're using the oxygen produced by plants, and then our gut microbes are in their own ecosystem, so using the food provided by us, and then our body uses the byproduct. So it's fascinating how we can see it on a larger scale as us living in our ecosystem around us and our environment, and then the small scale going on at cellular level with microbes.
Yeah, living within us. We are the hosts and they are the visitors. So, I mean, you know, we know that, well, I say we know that it's documented that, you know, you are what you eat. And so this is the fuel for these microbes is coming in through our, you know, orifices. And so I know that certain microbes will favor certain inputs, and I know it's a lot of the around the insoluble fiber. Now, you know where I'm going with this. Someone with irritable bowel can find this really challenging to consume the appropriate quantities of those, you know, the fibrous type foods that really help to feed these gut bacteria. And you know I've followed FODMAP on occasion, just, you know, it's when things are particularly challenging. So the a restrictive diet to eliminate the fructose. Tell me what that is.
FODMAPs are fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. All of those simple sugars that.
Right. So fermentable oligosaccharides, and they're actually the things that these bacteria love, aren't they?
Yes, but some people, so feeding the bacteria might be fine for some people, but people with more sensitive stomachs then might feel more of the bloating and get pain associated with that. And it is, as I've mentioned, it's very individual, gut health and our gut microbiome as well. And that's where more restrictive diets like a low FODMAPs diet is really important to seek help with that from a registered dietitian or someone trained in a low FODMAPs diet, because it can be quite a minefield, really, trying to find foods or reducing foods. And with restriction of foods for one reason also means that there's restriction of other micronutrients as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think the thing to say about this is that FODMAP's a temporary solution and it's really the reintroduction phase when we are reintroducing the foods one by one in order to determine the culprits, if you like, because you know, I know that of the FODMAPs, there are some that are definitely triggers and others that are not going to do that for me. So and so then you select from that group. But yeah, restrictive diets are not ideal, I know. But when you find yourself in a situation where you're frightened to leave the house, sometimes, you know, it really is unavoidable. But as you say, definitely seek advice in navigating that path, because it is, as you say, an absolute minefield. But you know, for those people who have got this sensitivity, I know I've tried you know, supplements that I suppose let's come on to that actually. What on earth are these supplements? Prebiotics, probiotics. I think I know what antibiotics do, but because, you know, this is, again, there's a lot of confusion around this area, isn't there?
Yes, definitely, and the terms as well are sometimes it's confusing to know which is which, and it is sometimes something that then would be recommended for those people who are looking for supplements. So probiotics are the live microorganisms that, when consumed in adequate quantities, have a beneficial effect on the host. So these are strains of beneficial bacteria, for example. But what's important here is that it is very strain specific. So the probiotics that are used in supplements, it's important to look for strains that have been through research and well-researched strains that show that they have this probiotic effect, which is when, and this is when they're supplements or shown to be probiotics in food, and it's the strain that you see listed. But there's a lot more talk now on fermented foods as well, and how they could provide probiotics. But when looking at those for their probiotic benefits, right now the definition for probiotics and having a benefit to health is related to the strain. So if fermented foods that you buy in a supermarket and just take off the shelf and you can't prove that there's a specific strain in there, it doesn't meet that definition of probiotic yet. So until that's we know what strains are present. And prebiotics, in contrast, then are the non-digestible food components or carbohydrates. So these more complex carbohydrates, like in fiber-based foods, and these are utilized by host microorganisms to then confer health benefits. But prebiotic supplements commonly seen in the research are fructooligosaccharides and galacto-oligosaccharides. So that's oligosaccharides, that is what we spoke about in the FODMAPs definition. But in supplement form, these have been researched where some of them might be better for people with sensitive stomachs rather than sometimes in more specific foods that people struggle with. But importantly, a food-first approach should be encouraged. And this is why we recommend that you speak with a healthcare professional about what's best for you, and because it is very individual. Oh, I can't hear you, Philippa. Don't know what's happened.
Oh, I knocked my microphone. Don't worry.
Oh, here now.
My lips were moving and there was nobody home. Oh dear. There you go. Yeah, I mean, because the strains that can be isolated and put into supplements are few and far between. That, you know, if you consider the whole ecosystem that's living inside the gut, they've narrowed it down to a few that there's some research of. They've researched to prove benefit in consuming them, but it is quite limited, isn't it? The numbers of strains that you can take through a probiotic supplement.
Yes, yeah. And I suppose in contrast to the trillions of bacteria that are present in our gut microbiota, yes, it is only a few that are known probiotics to be used in supplements. But bifidobacteria and lactobacillus are often different, the genuses that come up as probiotic bacteria. There's actually, I think now the latest is 94 strains of bifidobacteria shown to be probiotic. So the number is rising. It's just whether you can prove that those specific strains are in certain food products or supplements.
Yes, yeah. And that's the thing, because they're alive in us, and soon as they pass out of us, they're dead, aren't they?
Yeah, so that is so with probiotics, you're considering that they are live microorganisms and they've got to make it through the gastrointestinal tract, so stomach acid and also the heat of our body. So yes, it is that's something to consider with supplements and how they work as well.
It is quite a journey, as you say. So the idea of the prebiotic is that it's providing, I'm assuming it's a concentrated source of those oligosaccharides that you referred to.
So it's really, you can look kind of deeply into the science of how it works, and the mechanisms still need more research, but it will change depending on the structure. So it's the structure of the carbohydrate and how much is then needed to feed the the good gut bacteria in our gastrointestinal tract, and also then the enzymes that are needed to break down the carbohydrates. So some prebiotics are very specific to certain bacteria because of the enzymes that are needed to break it down. So that's where you might have specifically these probiotic bacteria feeding on the carbohydrates that maybe produce less gas, so you don't get as much bloating. But we need more research on in human groups, and we do have research showing that there's these specific groups. So groups of elderly people, children with autism as well, and groups of people with functional gut disorders. But the body of research still is growing, and that will hopefully bring us more answers on what is best for different groups and different populations.
Yeah. And so, like you say, there's not much around the menopause specifically in this this particular area. The other thing that I'm not sure if you can help me with, the idea of antibiotics and the fact that they do kill off the some of these gut bacteria that we need, the good bacteria, and so where do we, what's going on around prebiotics with regards to this? Because I know there's some conflict that can we take these at the same time? Should we not? I mean, do you have any ideas on this?
It is an interesting area, not one that I know a huge amount about, but of course antibiotics are really important in some scenarios for to be prescribed by healthcare professionals, and they're really important in that sense. But it's just how can we maintain our gut microbiota and our good gut bacteria? So I think more research is needed, again, maybe on specificity of strains and what probiotics could be beneficial. But that's certainly an interesting area for the future, because now that we're gaining more understanding on how important the gut microbiota is. So it's probably one to watch on the research area.
Okay, well, good. I mean, I think it is important. I mean, ideally, when we're not taking antibiotics, as you say, unnecessarily, like when I was young, and that banana flavored syrup that I used to get on a regular basis because of repeated ear infections, may indeed have had a part to play in the fact that my insides have been rebelling ever since. But yeah, luckily we've come to realize that antibiotics have their place, but really it should be used only when absolutely necessary, because of the resistance and the negative impacts on the gut microbes. So the gut-brain axis is something that I am interested to hear more about, because definitely part of what we can struggle with through menopause is unexplained anxiety, mood disorders in terms of sometimes low mood, sometimes and definitely, if I say sometimes, definitely fluctuating mood, flying off the handle at the slightest thing. I think I might even have posted about that today. So is this speaking to that at all?
It's certainly an interesting area and potential maybe for research application as well, and looking at how that the gut-brain axes might be related to menopause. And there is research on particularly preclinical research, but more research is needed in clinical trials on how there's effects of on anxiety and stress as well with the gut-brain axes, and how targeting the gut microbiota might change cortisol levels, the stress hormone. So there's research there on how the gut-brain axes might be affected by changes to the gut microbiota, but the specific population and looking at the life stage of menopause, certainly an interesting one for the future. And looking at quality of life and things is always important.
I mean, definitely. I mean, the cortisol piece of the puzzle definitely comes into play during this period of time. And so if you know, there is research around that, then I think that there would be crossover into this area, because we know that increased levels of cortisol are going to predispose us to have more in the way of hot flushes, for instance. So actually, if we can be moderating the cortisol levels, then that can actually assist and reduce the incidence of hot flushes. So, and of course, you know, there's lots of different strategies by which we can reduce cortisol levels. I guess looking at why they're high in the first place is a starting point, and you know, that bidirectional effect of anxiety, the way that we're thinking about things, fueling anxiety, which creates cortisol, which gives us hot flushes, which makes us feel even more concerned about particular scenarios, you know, and so on, onward and onward it goes. And, you know, and I kind of favor multi approaches, so that it's not just one thing that we're doing. And so my MO is all about movement. And so what we can do to move to reduce anxiety levels, to reduce cortisol levels, and also meditate to reduce anxiety levels and cortisol levels. But, you know, it rarely is one thing the answer to everything, in my experience. And so to have a couple of tools in the toolbox is always what I think is is helpful for us. And it may be that we need to tackle it on a number of fronts. Digestive is always high up there on my agenda. You are what you eat, and the gut microbes are clearly looking for certain kinds of nourishment. So, you know, to do all these things in conjunction, and certainly with yoga, for instance, the Ayurvedic lifestyle is integral if you were following that, you know, and they're predominantly vegetarian, plant-based foods. And so, you know, you can see how both of those things taken together can benefit the whole of the human ecosystem. So yeah, that's what I often would suggest to people. But it's really important that we know about these things. What are they? How might they be useful to us? But clearly, to do our homework. You know, we've got to do our homework and consult appropriate professionals. And you know, if you're in any doubt ever, then definitely go to your doctor. But thank you, Brittany, so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Yes, me too. Thanks so much for having me today. It's been really, really interesting to discuss this area with you and hear more about your ideas on it.
Well, thank you so much. Take care now. Have a good day.
Thank you too.
Bye for now.
Bye.